Good afternoon, comrades. I hope that we've got some people listening to this particular discussion that we are going to have this afternoon. Specifically, we wish to talk about the issue of what it means to be a communist. If there are any of you guys out there, you could perhaps just indicate by way of comments that you are indeed present and that we can proceed. Salute everybody. Revolutionary greetings. I hope that you are well. Great, I see that we are there and we've got people listening and we've got people interacting. We've got comrades interacting and people listening. Okay, comrades, so I think that we can start off with some perceptions about what it means to be a communist. I think first and foremost, Che Guevara said that a communist person is a person that really loves humanity. And so much so that such a person would be absolutely disturbed by any violence committed against any human being and would be moved to action in the face of oppression, exploitation, and discrimination. But I think that there are different stages in what it means to be a communist. I mean, we have to consider that in the pre-revolutionary stage, obviously a communist person is someone who is very good at organizing and mobilizing people, especially the working class, around the key issues that communism wishes to achieve in its challenge to capitalism. Then, of course, there's the revolutionary phase in which a communist, as in the instance of Lenin or instance of Castro, the instance of Che Guevara and so on, Ho Chi Minh, took the lead in that final struggle of revolution to overthrow the capitalist system in the countries that they found themselves in. And then finally, there is a post-revolutionary personality, and that is the communist personality that actually engages in transforming the society and ensuring that the dictatorship of the working class is in fact established in that society, and the society changes dramatically towards the working class. The working class forces its will on the society and deconstructs capitalism. So I can identify at least three different phases through which a communist person moves through in a revolutionary life. Now, of course, a revolutionary life depends very much on the struggle itself and the success of that struggle. And whether one transitions from one phase to the next phase and so on actually depends on the success of where one is at, at that particular moment. And I think that in South Africa, especially many of the older comrades who were in the trade union movement, who were in the townships, who were in communities and so on during the 1970s and 1980s and bore the brunt of the struggle, actually must have been overjoyed by the early 1990s when the prospect of a possibility of overthrowing capitalism came about as a result of dramatic changes globally. One of those dramatic changes globally was, of course, the Battle of Cuito Carnaval in southern Angola, when the apartheid army was defeated and pushed out of Angola. And that army had to retreat all the way back to South Africa, out of Namibia as well. And not only was southern Angola liberated, but also Namibia was liberated and could have its first democratic elections, and soon thereafter South Africa as well. What happened then was that South Africa went through a process of negotiated settlement. And that negotiated settlement created a situation where much of the gains of struggle in the 1970s and 1980s were actually reversed, and a lot of the democratic structures of the working class were demobilized. I can remember that in the 1970s and 1980s, one could find Marxist literature almost anywhere in South Africa. One could find underground literature from the working class almost everywhere, pamphlets and art and posters and all kinds of things. All of those things have disappeared because it would seem as if since 1994, the working class has effectively been demobilized in this country, and the structures of the working class in the townships, in communities, in the factories and in the mines have also been demobilized. So it happened because a lot of the comrades who were very good comrades got absorbed into the state, and the state itself was not transformed. It remained a capitalist state. And as such, the comrades that got absorbed into the state was transformed by that capitalist state. And in being transformed by that capitalist state, tasted the fruits of life, of being a manager on behalf of the capitalist system, and consequently lost their revolutionary consciousness. I think that it is important for those who remain revolutionary to actually mobilize, to work in the townships, to work on the ground, to work in the factories, to work on the farms, to work in the mines, to ensure that we rebuild the structures of revolutionary participatory democracy, that we rebuild the structures that are required for an actual revolution to take place in this country that would put the working class on the path to power. And I think that that path to power should not be a long march. It should not be a long walk. It should be something that we exploit the contradictions of the capitalist system as quickly as possible in order to ensure that we have forward movement again in this class struggle that is in South Africa. It is a great pity that one seldom hears the words class struggle anymore. One seldom hears the words working class anymore. One seldom hears the phraseology of a revolutionary ideology amongst the working class, the poor, the unemployed, in communities, on the factory floor, in the mines and everywhere. So there's a lot of hard work to be done. And this brings us to another aspect of a communist personality. Communist personality is not someone who participates in struggle for self-gain and enrichment. A communist personality is someone who participates in struggle selflessly and dedicates all their time and activity towards promoting the struggle of the working class, towards mobilizing the working class, towards organizing the working class, towards ensuring that there are revolutionary structures in place to ensure that a revolution actually can take place. So a revolutionary person, a communist person, has a great love for humanity and fights against capitalism because capitalism exploits humanity, it oppresses humanity. It discriminates against humanity based on gender, class, and a whole range of other discriminatory practices that divides the working class against itself. And so it is very important for us to ensure that we love humanity so much that we spend all our time fighting for a society in which oppression, exploitation, and discrimination no longer exists. And we can see in the United States of America now the revolutionary outpouring of the poor, of the working class, of the black community in that country after the police brutality of the last 2 weeks, and reminding people that under capitalism you cannot breathe. If you try to breathe under capitalism, they will quickly try and suffocate you and make sure that you stop breathing. The problem in the United States now is that there's a lack of revolutionary leadership, and I'm afraid that in the South African context, if we get similar situations where there's an outpouring of disgust with the capitalist system, if there's an outpouring of unhappiness, of rejection of the capitalist system, we must ask whether we've got the structures and the revolutionary leadership in place to in fact take advantage of that particular situation, or whether we are just university-based textbook revolutionaries instead, who are too scared to go into the working class, too scared to work in communities, too scared to engage with mine workers, too scared to confront the exploitative situation on our farms and so on. And I think I will leave the discussion there and then engage with you in a process of engaging with your comments and engaging with your questions, and then we proceed from that point on. So I'm going to stop talking at this particular point. I think I've said a lot, and I'm awaiting your comments on what it is that I have said. It's over to you now. Comrades, are we still there? Are we engaging? Are we interacting? Revolution is a process of social relations, building new social relations that will overcome the exploitative relations of the past, that will overcome the relations of capitalism and create new relations in society in which every human being can live to their full potential, rather than the current situation that we are in, where people are subjected to drudgery, are subjected to the most incredible exploitation in their places of work, and also the most incredible degradation where they are working. Solani, I see your question, and your question is an important one. How would you define the character of the SACP in current struggles? Well, I think that if we look at the SACP in terms of its relationship to power, one wonders how a communist party could take out the dictatorship of the proletariat from its constitution, because that's a key element of working class power once one moves to assume power. I think the second point about the SACP that is very troublesome is that how can a political party not want political power for the working class but claims to represent the working class? The purpose of revolutionary struggle is to take power. The purpose of revolutionary struggle is not to become an appendage to those in power, but actually to move towards the assumption of power on behalf of the working class. Perhaps that could answer your question. And then I see, comrades, forgive me, my eyes are not so good anymore. Andisile, is the working class ready for the struggle for counter-hegemony? Well, when we talk about the sort of Gramscian concept of hegemony, it means that the struggle is everywhere. The struggle is on the sports fields, the struggle is in the streets, the struggle is in the factories, the struggle is in the cultural sphere, it's everywhere. And we really need to engage with the struggles everywhere, and not sit back and hope that things will happen. You cannot sit under an apple tree and expect an apple to fall into your lap. You have to actually get up and pick that apple. Otherwise, you can sit there forever, and you will never have the apple that you hoped would fall into your lap. Revolutionary activity is not about hoping. Revolutionary activity is not about believing. We don't believe that Jesus will come. We believe that we do not believe in any of these things. What we hold to is action, the action to organize society towards a struggle that will get the working class into power. And I don't think that we are seeing any of that at the moment. I think that at the moment we are seeing a situation where it's even difficult for the working class to get revolutionary literature anywhere. There was more revolutionary literature on the on the streets during apartheid than what there is now. I could get the full works of Lenin during the apartheid period from certain bookshops. I could get most of the writings of Karl Marx and so on. These days you go into a bookshop, they don't even have a politics shelf anymore. They don't even have an economic shelf anymore. All that they have in a bookshop these days is business and religion. Now, you should ask yourself, why is that the case? Why is it that in the South African context, it is so impossible for young workers and so on to engage with revolutionary literature and educate themselves and raise their consciousness? And the reason for that is simple. The task after 1994 of the neoliberal government and state has been to depoliticize and demobilize the working class and demobilize revolutionary structures. They said as much when they said they took the country back from the brink. When Chris Hani was assassinated in April 1993, that provided the country with a revolutionary opportunity. But who is it that held the masses back at that particular time? When the people of Bophuthatswana violently rose up against Mangope's regime, that was another revolutionary opportunity. But who called people to calm down and go back home and stop engaging in street struggle? Revolution is about engaging with capitalism in the streets. It's taking the struggle out of boardrooms, out of closed spaces, into the streets, into communities, into the working class, and getting people to believe that they can actually take power. Getting people to understand that they can actually take power and they don't have to accept the current realities of poverty, unemployment, exploitation, and basically just being herded around like sheep. I think that the SACP needs to do some introspection. That is Dat Nika Kasper Tuka. The SACP needs to engage with the working class. It has lost its links to the working class. If one sits on the benches of parliament, surrounded by the security of parliament and so on, it's very difficult to engage with the working class. One needs to be in the working class to be able to participate and lead the working class. Well, and then the other question about capitalist triumphalism in the 1990s. Yes, there was capitalist triumphalism, but that is only because we allowed that triumphalism by retreating. You know, when you are struggling against capitalism, there should be no surrender and no retreat. If you retreat, then you become reformist and you become compromised. And it becomes very difficult for you to once again gain the momentum that you had in the 1970s and 1980s against this nefarious system. What is my take on the EFF? Well, I think that, like Fanon said, every generation has to get its radicals, and they have to challenge the system of the previous generation. I think that the EFF is interesting in that they've livened up the politics of South Africa. They have asked many difficult questions and so on of the system. They have made many challenges to the system, but at some point, we will have to realize that Parliament really is not a vehicle for revolutionary struggle. It is a chamber of the ruling class where different points of view within that ruling class are expressed, and different factions of that ruling class contest for power within the system itself, but not in a sense of overcoming the system and replacing it with something new. Maybe one of the big mistakes we made in 1994 was to assume that the parliament that we inherited, basically from the British and from apartheid, would be a vehicle that could transform our society. Clearly, it's not. I try to answer all those questions. Maybe there are follow-up questions from that. Okay, that Nika Kaspertuka, you want to know why people who are not employed are also classified as working class. The capitalist system in South Africa has always worked on the basis of having a large reserve army of unemployed workers so that it could suppress the wages and ensure that it has surplus profits and maximizes profits in the mines and on the farms of South Africa. It is quite sad that an Australian student can go during the annual picking season on the farms there and earn more money than a middle class person in South Africa just from picking fruit. It is sad that a mine worker in Australia basically earns a factor of 10 times more than what a South African mine worker earns for doing exactly the same work. And the reason why our wages are so suppressed is because our unemployment levels are so high. And the unemployment levels are a function of capitalism to ensure maximum profits within the African context. Remember that in the global economy, Africa has been assigned the role of supplying raw materials and minerals to that global economy. That's why manufacturing and so on has never been allowed to take place on this continent. And the only way that we can actually get to a situation where we can move the economy beyond just being a primary extractive economy to being one that is manufacturing and so on, is to overcome the situation of super exploitation that we are having. But the only way that we can overcome that super exploitation is through revolutionary action. And I don't think that there are many people in this country at the moment who are prepared to do that, the required actions to overcome super exploitation. Sarah Mokhwasi, I think it is very important for us to begin to teach. When Lenin returned to the Finland station after his exile in April 1917, one of the first things he said was that the task of the Bolshevik Party was to teach, was to educate. It is very, very important to engage, and to engage with the working class where the working class is. We cannot expect to get revolutionary education in new liberal universities and in new liberal institutions. A communist personality is someone who is able to extract information, to analyze situations, and to develop teaching materials and so on beyond the limitations of the capitalist institutions in society. And yes, you are right. I think it is very important for us even to go into the shacks and into the informal settlements, into what you call the Mukuku institutions. I think that is where the roots of any communist movement would be, on the factory floor, in the community organizations where the people are. We cannot conduct revolutionary education far removed from people in ivory towers. That Nika Kasper, socialism is the transitional phase. It is actually that phase which is supposed to be the phase of the dictatorship of the proletariat. But the word socialism has been unfortunately diluted by the Europeans and so on to say that they are neither capitalist nor communist, and therefore they are something in between. And the problem with that something in between is that inevitably in such situations the working class gets defeated. We have seen many socialist governments in France, and we have seen hardly any advance of the working class in that country. We have seen socialist governments elsewhere as well who have either been overthrown or who have in fact been defeated in elections and so on, because the working class becomes tired of them, because they cannot fulfill the promise of the power of the working class and a classless society that should follow a revolution. Sarah, yes, I think that revolutionary education should start as young as possible, and in communities with learners as young as possible. If you are in high schools, you can teach children in working class areas as to why there is a contradiction between the quality of education they are receiving and the quality of education that the middle classes in the suburbs and so on are receiving, and also the quality of resources and the quantity of resources and so on that is spent on the children of the middle class and the ruling class as compared to the children of the working class, because that is where the exploitation of the poor actually starts, because their education gets limited, because you cannot have an educated working class in a low-wage economy. An educated working class in a low-wage economy will reject low wages. They will reject their exploitation and their oppression. Kolani, you ask, what is my take on how marginalized communities can survive COVID-19? Well, I think that as far as I'm concerned, if we had a revolutionary state at the start of COVID-19, we would have taken drastic actions. We would have frozen the flow of capital out of the country to make sure that there's enough resources in the country. We would have nationalized the commanding heights of the economy. Capitalist countries even do that. During World War I in Britain, the commanding heights of the economy was under national control for the duration of that particular war. And we would have issued people with food stamps and with a food supply chain. We would have taken over the retail food supply chain and made sure that food actually flows to the working class during this time. But as it is, with the lockdown, it was just a military exercise, and we saw no flow of resources, whether it's health resources, food resources, or any other resources to the working class in any meaningful way to sustain them during the lockdown. And so consequently, we are having a situation where people are actually starving in those particular townships and those communities. So I think that, again, the working class has to ask itself, why is there this differential approach to the suburbs and the working class areas? Why is the state responding differently? And that is because it's a class state, and we need to address the issue of this class state if we want to move forward. Busi, how are you, comrade? It's so good to hear from you. It's so good to see you. Socialist states and progressive states in the world are attacked through imperialist economic sanctions. What can be done to protect and defend them? Busi, I think that the answers are there within the revolutionary literature already. You can only defend a revolution by expanding it. If you have a revolution in South Africa, you must make sure that it expands into Zimbabwe, into Mozambique, that it expands into Angola, Botswana, Namibia, and so on. You cannot want to have a revolution here and hope that you are going to survive, because capitalism will simply isolate you and ensure that your revolution fails. And this is actually what happened to all our revolutionary attempts so far. The Russian Revolution itself was eventually defeated through its isolation. And it was defeated through its isolation because the Russians mistakenly thought that they could build communism in one country, and it wasn't possible. Nika, you are asking about what's my personal take on the EFF's proposal on the expropriation of land without compensation. And are white people doing enough to condemn organizations such as AfriForum? Well, I think that I agree with the EFF's position that land should be nationalized in this country. The land should belong to the working people of this country. It should not belong to individuals. It should not belong to people who fence other people out of the land and thereby starve them into submission or into wage labor. I think that the land should belong to the working class, and the means of production as a whole should be under the control and management of the working class in this country. And I don't think that people should be compensated. It's not just about land expropriation without compensation. It's about business expropriation without compensation. It's about mining expropriation without compensation. It is about the expropriation of the means of production without compensation, because the means of production in this country was built up by the working class. It should belong to the working class and not to owners who enrich themselves at the cost of the working class. As for organizations such as AfriForum, two things about them. The first thing is that they are always exclusive in their focus on the rights of one particular section of society, which is a small minority of society. The aim of communism is to open up the potential of society to all the people who are living within that society, rather than excluding anyone. And so AfriForum really should have no place in a revolutionary society. And the fact that it still exists is an indication of the lack of transformation of our state. Hi, Sikander, how are you? Hi, Julie, how are you? Any further questions, comrades? Sarah, the SACP does not seem to have a clear position on the media at the moment. But the media serves the interests of the ruling class, because the media is financed and operated by the ruling class to ensure the hegemony and control of the ruling class over society. And the only way in which the media can become revolutionary is if the media is owned by the working class, if the media is managed by the working class, if the media is controlled by the working class. So in other words, media workers should participate in the class struggle in order to gain power over institutions of the media. During COVID-19 in Argentina, a media boss wanted to fire the workers at his media house, and they actually took over the institution, and they are now running it as a workers' media cooperative, giving alternative working class news instead of the news that the owner previously gave. And this is really what should be happening. We are going to have in the next couple of weeks hundreds of thousands of retrenchments in South Africa because of COVID-19. And people should refuse those retrenchments. Instead, we should demand that the bosses are retrenched and not the workers, and that the workers actually take over those businesses as cooperatives. That I would happily participate in all progressive structures. So I would happily participate also in the engagements with any other organizations that are to the left of those who are in power at the moment. So I'm looking forward to your invitation. Comrades, I thank you. Okay, there are more questions. Okay, if there are no more questions, I think I'm going to sign off from this particular discussion. And okay, no, there, Lebogang Bongani Panyeko is asking a question. She's saying, in the South African context, we have political left formations. How are we going to overcome that to bring unity? One of my big criticisms of the left in South Africa has been that they are very good at fighting each other and very weak at fighting capitalism. They are forever at one another's throat instead of finding common ground and finding a common struggle, and finding a line of march towards the end of capitalism. So it is very important that we actually work towards left formations beginning to engage with each other in a manner that would actually create left unity. And left unity means working class unity. It doesn't mean liberal unity. It doesn't mean unity of the Santon Tea Club with a trade union federation. That is not left unity. That is liberalism, and that is a sellout. We cannot have that kind of sellout. It must be effectively left organizations that have an interest in creating a new society. Kaulani, the issue of COSATU in this country, it is such a tragedy. This was such a revolutionary organization during the 1970s and the 1980s. We had such hope for this organization in terms of the future of this country. But unfortunately, its alliance with the neoliberal capitalist state has put it in a situation where it's completely compromised. And if it wants to liberate itself from that compromise, it would actually begin to distance itself from the capitalist ruling class and begin to again represent workers like it did in the 1970s and the 1980s. Nika, yes, indeed. Your position is absolutely correct. There is definitely a big contradiction between COSATU, SACP, and the alliance with the ruling party in the new liberal state. And if they want to regain their credibility in society, in actual fact, they need to realign themselves with the struggles of the working class and do so aggressively and openly, and not in a manner that seeks to fix capitalism, but rather in a manner that seeks to overcome capitalism. Yes, Vusi, you are correct. We seem to be fragmenting more than consolidating. And yes, our struggle is a popcorn struggle at the moment. We have working class people rising up in protest and in defiance here, there, and everywhere, but never at the same time. We do not have unified class action in this country because we do not have unified class leadership in this country. Sarah Mukhwasi, the fourth industrial revolution is an important revolution in the sense that it provides us with technology that can either be oppressive and exploitative or technology that can be liberating. And it depends on how we use that technology. If we use, for example, cell phone technology effectively, we could effectively reach very widely, and we could effectively engage very widely, and we could effectively mobilize very widely beyond just mass meetings. We could massify the meetings greatly by actually spreading the word of revolution and the messages of revolution and so on very widely beyond specific communities, and we can overcome what Vusi calls the popcorn uprisings that we are seeing at the moment, that are not coordinated and that are not led by revolutionary understanding. I think that moving forward, comrades, it is to educate, it is to organize, it is to mobilize, it is to understand our situation. It is not good enough to know Marx and Lenin, Stalin or Trotsky or whoever. It is actually to analyze the situation in South Africa with regard to the position of the working class and where it is at this moment, and to understand those contradictions and then use those contradictions and the resolution of those contradictions to be able to move forward in the struggle of the working class. I think that if we look at the situation of the Russian Revolution, you had the Bolsheviks, you had the Mensheviks, you had the social revolutionaries, you had a plethora of parties, but you had one party that was able to provide leadership and to capture the imagination of the people. I think that it is important that there is to be unity in the working class in South Africa, but it has to be principled unity under the leadership of leaders that can actually capture the imagination of the masses and are not discredited. I think a part of our problem in South Africa with left movements and organizations is that many of them fell off the wagon or off the gravy train and perhaps are trying to get back onto that gravy train and therefore are not very serious about real revolutionary organization, but more want to be elected into parliament so that they can have the benefits of the neoliberal state. I think I've tried to answer all that batch of questions that came through now. Comrades, I think at this point perhaps we can sign off. Well, no, Dutch, you've got one more question there, the issue of the international community. South Africa acts as a sub-imperial state for global capitalism. And so South Africa has penetrated on behalf of global capitalism all its neighboring states in much of Africa. So if you have a revolution in South Africa, it will be very easy to trigger that revolution throughout Africa. And you can then realize a vision of radical Pan-Africanism. You see, much of the Zimbabwean economy belongs to South African companies. If you take control of Anglo-American Corporation in South Africa, you virtually have control of the whole of Zimbabwe. The same with Botswana. The same with Mozambique and other countries as well. If you take control of the South African economy as the working class, you effectively have control of all these other countries as well. And so your struggle will very quickly become an international struggle. Because of the dependence, the global dependence on African minerals and so on, you can then use that control over minerals to actually deprive capital and global capitalism of the resources it requires to do manufacturing, and therefore force revolutionary situations in those countries. And of course, when we talk about the international community, we must ask who we are talking about. Are we talking about the global working class, or are we talking about the United Nations and other institutions of capital? Lenin called the League of Nations the Club of Imperialists, and that's basically what the Security Council at the United Nations is. Thank you, comrades. I hope that I've answered many of your questions, and I hope that it has been helpful to have this discussion. I think in future we should try and set up webinars where we can all learn from each other, and the discussion is not just a one-way discussion. Good night, comrades, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you again sometime in future.